Fabulous, thank you. And I'm hoping everyone can hear me and see the slides. So I'm going to talk for 20 minutes without hesitation, deviation, or repetition on life course simulation of long-term childhood policy impacts on health, well-being, and inequality. And this is really just a very basic overview of what life course simulation is, and sort of an illustrative example of one, here's one we did earlier to show you. It's not under the bonnet, and I'm not going to give you technical details of how to do that, but some of those technical details are in these. I'm going to control it this way. So these are my collaborators and acknowledgements. So some of the, so these are 3 readings, and I think you'll have access to the slides afterwards. They'll be published in a version on the web after. So anyway, these are the sort of readings which give you some of that gory detail if you're glutton for punishment. But basically, this is a kind of overview for consumers in a way of this kind of information, and so that you're familiar with it, and you can, if you're interested in taking it further, you can. Because it's quite techy. Doing microsimulation is quite geeky. It's beyond the usual level of geekiness for economic evaluation, which is already quite geeky in a way. So, to do it properly, you need an actual microsimulation person who's really super advanced in that, and to work with them. And you need a separate person who can do the economic evaluation side of it. We're working on ways of making this more user-friendly, but we're still at the mainstream, the mainframe computer stage, if you see what I mean. We haven't got to the iPad stage where everyone can just do it easily. But we're working on that. We're working on making these kinds of methods a bit more user-friendly. Okay, so here's the agenda of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give a quick overview of it and what this is all about. I'm going to talk about the evaluation framework. What do we mean by long-term health and well-being? How do we measure that? How do we think about that? And then I'll give you this example of we evaluated a training program for parents of preschoolers, and I'll show you what this kind of long-term evaluation looks like. And then if there's time, I might go a little bit under the bonnet. In fact, I probably won't. There's some technical detail. I probably won't go under the bonnet, but if you wanted to ask some techie questions, then I can come back to that after the talk. Okay, so the idea is that life course microsimulation is a really useful engine. It's a useful thing that can help us in childhood policy, help us look at the long-term effects of things. Trials and quasi-experiments typically show us the short-term effects of interventions, 1, 2, 3 years. But we want to look a longer crystal ball than that. With childhood, a lot of the health and well-being effects occur decades later in midlife and in later life. So we want a longer crystal ball to look at these long-term effects and the long-term public cost implications, because things that happen in childhood that change your life trajectory in childhood have huge cost implications in future, and that's of interest to policymakers, or at least it should be. It's of interest to some policymakers. Some policymakers care about these long-term effects. Obviously, not all of them. Some of them, some of them only have the time horizon of electives, as we know, but some others take a longer. Okay, so I've said this already. Why do we need this? Well, we need it because we're interested in the long-term impacts of things, and also we're interested in how the long-term impacts vary for different children in different circumstances. Microsimulation is great at looking at heterogeneity, differences between different individuals. It's not just about averages. So that's one really important function of that's the micro in microsimulation, small individuals. And the second, I'm hearing that the sound is a bit wonky. I'm not sure I can do much about that, I'm afraid.
You move a little bit closer, Richard, to your mic. It might just, we think it's your noise cancellation that's chopping in.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm using a Centre for Health Economics bog standard device. Okay, so the other point is you've got the micro bit, but then it's important that we coordinate childhood policy, because different government agencies are doing different things for children at different ages. And there's often not much coordination, and they all have different measures, different kind of, education people are interested in, exam results. Social care people are interested in behavioural problems and so on. Tax benefit, welfare people are interested in money. And so you've got these different metrics and measures being used by trialists and quasi-experimentalists in different policy sectors. And you can't really compare the benefits, the value for money of different interventions across these different sectors. So it'd be nice to have a sort of single measure of health and well-being that allows us, long-term health and well-being, that allows us to compare value for money and inequality impacts across these policy sectors to help a little bit with the coordination of childhood policy. And this is in line with the Treasury, the UK Treasury well-being guidance for appraisal. They're recommending a thing called a well-being at the moment, which I will much more later. The idea is to have this general measure of well-being that allows you to compare the benefits of different policies in different sectors. So microsimulation allows us to do that. It spits out all these different specific outcomes, but then it allows us to summarize them in a sort of level playing field measure, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay. Our bunch of models that we're working on, I mean, this is just our bunch, other people are no doubt working on other models. And obviously, let 1,000 flowers bloom, let's have lots of different models out there. But here's our suite of models. We've got a childhood model, age 0 to 17, which is mostly based on the thing called the Millennium Cohort Study. This is one of the great longitudinal studies in this country. It's a UK-wide study of about 20,000 individual babies born in the year 2000 and then followed up. So that's a fantastic data set on which we're estimating all of our equations and our mix. Then we're going to extend that to LifeSim adolescent mental health, which is going to focus particularly on the mental health outcomes, bring in some extra data and some extra nuance around the mental health problems in adolescents, which is a particularly important policy issue, growing adolescent mental health problems, not just in the UK, and it's a weak area of research, and it's something that needs to be really, focused on a bit. And and then finally there's the adulthood version. So you take, you model long-term effects from age 5, let's say, to 17, using LifeSim childhood and so on. But then you need to know the rest of the life, and then you plug in your age 17 outcomes into your adulthood model, and then spit out the rest of life. That's called LifeSim adulthood. And we've actually, this is all work in progress, but we've published the adulthood version, and I've done some illustrative evaluations using that model. Okay, so that's our suite of models. And here's the basic idea. This is the big idea. You take if you've got an intervention in childhood, someone does a trial or a quasi-experiment, or lots of them, and then you review that evidence, and so you find out what is your short-term of this intervention. And it might be on a couple of outcomes. Usually there's 2 or 3 or more of different kinds of an intervention, and you take those short-term effects. Step 1, so here you are, short-term effects from a trial. Then step 2, you map those short-term effects onto your model. So for example, the short-term effect in the trial might be measured using the parent-reported IBERG child behavior inventory intensity score. Some very specific measure might be used in the trial. And inevitably, there's thousands of different measures out there in different trials. So what we need to do is take the trial measure and map it onto the measures that we've got in our model. So we've got a thing called the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire. And we've mapped those 2 things together. And then once you've done that mapping, then you can take the effect on our relevant outcome and shove it into the model and then spit out the long-term outcome. So that's step 3. Bingo, you put it into the model and then you model out the outcomes. And that's basically what you do. It's kind of a 3-stage process. And it's about sort of combining data from different sources to get useful information for policymakers. So that's the basic overall framework. And then once we spit out all these outcomes, how do we summarize it into our long-term well-being measure? Well, that's basically called The healthy year or the well-being year is our summary metric. So a healthy year, you've probably heard of this from health economics. It's called the QALY, the quality adjusted life year. There's a similar concept in broader economics called the well-being year, or the Treasury call it a well-being. And the Treasury version, I'll just go on to that, is actually not a whole year of well-being. It's a 1-point improvement in your life satisfaction score for 1 year. And basically, that gives you 1/7 of a year of good well-being, because the well-being score is from 1 to 10, and misery, as bad as death, is about 3, and the best you can get is a 10. So you've got 7 points of improvement to get 1 whole year's worth of well-being. Anyway, whatever, you can measure these things in different ways, but basically the idea is to have this general measure of well-being. The Treasury recommends the life satisfaction approach. There are other ways of creating a well-being year. There's the multidimensional quality of life questionnaire approach. There's various questionnaires out there which look at various domains of life. Or there's the composite index, where you take measures like you have income, you might have health, you might have whether you've been in prison or you've divorced, or you could have a list of bad things that happen, adverse outcomes, and you weigh those up in an index to create a sort of to create your well-being measure. And that's the approach that we actually take in our model. But we can use we can use any of these approaches. Okay, so that's the well-being year approach that we use to summarize. And remember, the point of this is not that we're idiots and we think that well-being is just a one-dimensional thing. The point of it is that we want to summarize a lot of data into an overall index that allows us to compare the value for money of different interventions that target different aspects of people's lives, in the same way that the health quality does that in health economics. Right, I'm running out of time. The illustrative example is this training program. This is aimed at parents of 5-year-old kids who have some sort of risk of antisocial behaviour, and we run our model in 100,000 children aged 5 in England, and it costs about £2,000, the parent training classes, and we're comparing not delivering this to publicly funding this intervention. And luckily, we have a nice meta-analysis of trials that's already been done for us, which was great. And they looked at this intervention has been trialed loads of times in different countries, and they summarise the findings of that, and they tell us this is a very standard sort of finding from these kind of trials. There's a 0.46 standard deviation decrease in conduct problems if you run this intervention on these children, and so that's our effect size, and then we map that onto our model. So their effect size was using more like the Iberg inventory score or different. We map that onto our SDQ score, which is a very similar measure of conduct problems, and we work out that that's a 0.7 point reduction in SDQ conduct problems, and then we modify that for different kinds of children. Because the nice thing about this meta-analysis is they can look at different short-term effects on different children. So they found that children with worse baseline problems gained a bigger effect, and children with parents who had mental health problems also gained a bigger effect. So we throw that into the model as well, and then we do other things. We do sensitivity on maybe this effect won't last very long, maybe it'll fade out over a few years. So we do various bits of sensitivity analysis around them. And here we are. Here's our effects on conduct disorder, and we find that there's quite a large effect, sort of more than a 20% reduction in prevalence initially, but that slightly fades out after the first year. But it's still, even up to age 14, there's still reasonably large effect there on the prevalence of conduct disorder if you roll this policy out. And then the magic of the model is you then take that effect and you split it out into various adulthood outcomes. And you can first of all estimate the public cost implications of that. So in this diagram here, here's the public cost of various kinds. This is time on the horizontal axis. So basically, it pays for itself after about 10 to 15 years. The dotted lines are the initial cost of it. But then over the lifetime, look at all these huge cost savings in taxes, benefits, mental illness costs, prison costs. It reduces numbers of people in prison, and so on. So over a lifetime, it's hugely cost saving. And then you can also spit out all of these other well-being type outcomes. So how many years of life gained, how many people are going to go to university or not, how many years of unemployment, poverty, how much smoking, etc., etc. So all these various long-term benefits you can tot up. And then the great thing is you can aggregate, it's all very well. Some policymakers, health policymakers, are interested in the smoking benefits, education ones are interested in the educational outcomes, finance ministers are interested in the tax and benefit savings. But if you want to put it all together into an overall metric, you can create these good life years, this well-being or well-being type metric. And when you use that metric, you work out that the cost per good year, the cost per well-being year is £3,200, which is quite a low figure, but the benchmark would be considerably higher than that. So that shows that it's probably cost effective according to that sort of thing. But you can look at cost effectiveness in all these other metrics as well. I don't have time to go through the details of that. And then you can also, because it's a micro simulation, you can also work out that some children benefit more than others. So, someone's having a nice little sing song. Okay, so some children gain like 10 good years of life from this, so that's 1% of them, but most of them only gain less than one. So you can see there's a lot of heterogeneity in how many years of benefit you get from this. And so then you can do what's called policy targeting analysis. You can say, well, look, if we give it to certain kinds of children in certain circumstances, could we gain more? Would it be even more cost effective? And so we work out various policy targeting scenarios as to who gets this intervention. And here's 3 scenarios. Scenario 3 is the most targeted. You really just give it to a very small set of parents who are in poverty and children have got high levels of problems, and the parents had a university degree. Then you get these amazing, payback period of only 4 years, highly cost effective. But that's if you've got very little money to spend on this program in your local area. If you've got a bit more money to spend, you could go to policy 2, which focuses on people in poverty and so on. So basically you can go through various targeting scenarios in discussion with decision makers. Given how much money you want to spend on this, what would be the best way of spending that money? That's the idea. And then finally, you can do inequality analysis. And instead of just looking at inequality by money, which is the usual way of doing it, we can look at inequality in lifetime well-being, lifetime health and well-being. And I don't know if this graph makes sense to you, but basically these are percentiles of well-being at the bottom there. This is the whole population, the whole cohort of people in the UK. Some of them live 100 good, healthy, wealthy, and well-being years. Some die off young and have much fewer well-being years. And basically the gains from this policy are mostly in the first 2/5 of people in terms of their well-being. So the gains basically it's very it's reducing inequality in lifetime well-being, this policy for sure. So that's it's a good thing for reducing inequality in terms of well-being, not just in terms of income. So that's the sort of graph you can draw using this model. You can really look at inequality in life chances. Okay, so that's what we do there. And the idea is that this kind of analysis, it's a bit of a strange, exotic thing right now, talking about well-being and lifetime well-being. But the idea is that with as these models are developed in future, we can start doing this more routinely, and this will just become routine analysis. We always will look at lifetime health and well-being effects of policies, as well as the short-term effects. And we'll always, we'll start to talk and think about life chances and lifetime well-being effects on children rather than just the short-term policy impacts. And that is it. I'm kind of done.